capacity to integrate edible gardens as an instructional resource for teachers and to connect young people to nature where they live and their food systems. This fall, we are launching our CitySprouts Teachers Forum. And this is a forum for teachers to communicate with each other, to start to hear directly from each other some of the great ways, rich ways that you're using your garden to get ideas, to ask questions, to however you want to use it. We're just really thrilled to be able to provide a platform and hoping it's useful to you. Okay, so I would like now to talk about our presenters today. We have Monica Leone, who's a math coach at the Dr. Martin Luther King School in Cambridge, and she's going to make a few opening remarks. She's a great school garden learning advocate and has been working in the garden around math instruction for years. And then we've got Christine Fetter, who's a 4th grader at the Martin Luther King School, and Katie Hussey, 3rd grader at the Mather, and Tori in Boston, and then Tori Corpus again at the Dr. Martin Luther King School. So, Monica, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Great. And it's nice to be here, and thank you, Jane, for that generous introduction. And as Jane told you, I'm Monica Leone, and I'm the JK to 5 instructional math coach at the MLK School in Cambridge. And it's my pleasure to be here today to introduce you to the work of these 3 teachers who have used the garden to explore math and language arts. Our school has been a CitySprouts garden, or it's had a CitySprouts garden for about 8 years, and in that time, we've found a number of ways to apply classroom-based math and literacy lessons to the real-world context of gardening. It's such a simple pleasure to be outside with the students and watching math come alive. I think you will find that the connections between math, writing, and nature are inspirational. And we simply have to challenge our students to apply their knowledge in new ways in order to create more critical and flexible thinkers. The garden is an ideal place to do that. So without any further introduction, I believe Tori's the first presenter, and then unfortunately Christine is out sick today, so I'm going to actually present her lesson in the garden because we actually worked on it together all those years ago.
Okay, we're ready to move forward. And Mike, can you give me the control here, and I'll move us to Tori's slide. All right, here we go. Tori Corpus, welcome to CitySprouts Teachers Forum. Tell us about how you use the garden, and you now have control of your slides.
Hi everyone, my name is Tori, and I am now teaching junior kindergarten. I have taught 1st grade for 5 years at the King School, and I loved using the garden with 1st graders. And then I taught kindergarten and junior kindergarten mixed classrooms in the Chinese immersion program and loved going to the garden with those students. And now I have 4-year-olds, and we've recently gone to the garden, and I have noticed that the students really enjoy their time outside and they learn a lot in the garden. So for this particular forum, I'll be talking about measuring and counting in the garden. So we're going to move forward with the first slide. I don't think we have control.
Yeah, it didn't.
Okay. There's a little bar at the top. Tori, can you see the little, there we go. Yeah. All right, good work.
Thank you. So for our Common Core standards and standards that we hold at the King School, the students should be able to use tools for measurement, and that could be cubes or linking cube or tower blocks that we use, or even yarn sometimes. And we have to learn how to count from 1 to 10. That's the Common Core standard, but at our school, working with the math coach, we want to set a higher standard for the junior kindergartners and want to try to have them count up to 12. And then I also want my students to get familiar with numeracy, and that's a really wonderful way that I can do that in the garden. So we can move on to the next slide. So for this particular activity, you will need cubes or any other measuring tool that you feel that your students would use or want to use. Clipboards and worksheets. I find that it's really helpful for the students to be able to write out in the garden rather than having them wait until they're in the classroom because they might forget certain things or they might not be as apt to write down specific details. And I want them to be really detail-oriented. And then also pencils, and those are materials needed. So the activity is for students to be able to find seeds and seed pods in the garden. The students were so excited to open up whatever particular vegetable we were using or fruit and look at the seeds, and they were excited that there were a lot of seeds. And I really wanted the students to work on their one-to-one correspondence with counting, and this was a great chance because it was a challenge because the seeds were small, and we were able to work together, and the students were able to work as teammates for this particular activity. So we were able to sort the seeds and compare the size and shapes of the seeds, and of course we counted the seeds. So the students were able to use their connecting cubes to measure the collard greens, and they compared the leaves, and they compared by size and shape. And then the best part was that we were able to bring the leaves back into the school, back into our classroom on our science table, where they would be able to touch base and notice anything else they feel that they didn't notice before about the leaves, or if they just wanted to connect again in the classroom. It was something that I was able to have exposed on our science table, and I found that they did go back to it a lot because they were excited about it. So for some of the outcomes, there are so many, and I wasn't able to list all of them, but they were really interested in what they found growing in the garden. I really think that it made them even better scientists because they were out in the garden, they were able to touch the things that they were seeing and counting, and they wanted to find as many things as they could. So they were really interested and engaged. Counting and talking about numbers, that really helped them become more excited and become scientists and mathematicians. I think the garden is a great place where you can assume many roles for the students. You can assume the role of a writer or a mathematician or a scientist. I found that for this particular activity, we really were able to be scientists and mathematicians. And it gives them practice for noticing detail. And we were also given the opportunity to taste the plants, which I found made them really excited about vegetables. Maybe they wouldn't have been before, but because of this activity, they thought that the vegetables tasted even better. So this was a really great activity for many of the students, and there were so many great outcomes.
Wow, thank you so much, Troy. That's really great. You know, we see kids out in the garden, and it looks like they're just playing around, and I guess they are just playing around. But it's really amazing to hear the learning and the conscious learning that's set up behind that. I really appreciate that. So I know we've got some questions down here. I'm saving them for after we hear the other two teachers speak. So we'll move right on to Christine Fetter's presentation that Monica is going to present because Christine's had a family emergency.
Mm-hmm. So as you see, this is Christine Fetter. She's a 4th grade teacher here at the MLK Junior Elementary School. And the lesson that she wants to present to you is about measuring growth over time. This is a lesson that was in a math, it was in the Turk Investigations math curriculum. We've started using another math curriculum, but I think you'll see as I explain the lesson that it is very much a science lesson as well. And I know in the new science standards, collecting data and representing it and graphing it is very much a integral part of many of your new science standards. So I apologize for not knowing which science standard it applies to, but at the same time, I think as I explain it, you'll see the connections there as well. So the learning goal here was that students would collect data represented on a graph and notice changes over time. So basically, in order to get something like this organized differently than maybe an observation lesson or one where the kids are going out and doing something like measuring, you do need somebody to make sure you have a certain amount of space to plant in, and maybe we organize with the CitySprouts coordinator to, put together a certain amount of space for the kids to plant in. So we need to know about how far apart they're going to plant and all of those kind of things. And the students had time to measure their pea plants and predict how many centimeters the plants would grow by the next measuring session. I apologize. And in this, they are doing some work in the classroom, getting ready, setting up notebooks, and having a place to record all their data. But similar to what Tori was telling you, most of the work they do outside. So they bring all their materials outside with them. But thirdly, you'll notice that there's stations involved. So now we're talking about bigger kids, and we're also talking about planting in a small area. So you may have 5 or 6 different raised beds in your garden, but these kids are going to be planting their seeds pretty close together. So in order to make sure that it's a good learning experience, we break them into smaller groups. And so we have other things or other stations that they're working at when they're not actually planting or measuring on another day, measuring their plants. So they would go out and they would work on the composting or watering some vegetables, or even just cleaning or sweeping an area of the garden that needed some tidying up. So they would be doing those other things while maybe 4 students are either planting their pea pods, or on a further visit, they might be the ones measuring. So you understand that, when you're taking kids out, you have to make sure that everyone has enough space and also is doing something positive while they're waiting for their turn in the area to plant. So you need pea plants, popsicle sticks to label, and you see a little label that says peas, but maybe in the background you can see that each student's, you need a little stick or a label for each student's pea plant, because they wouldn't necessarily be able to find theirs the next time. A trellis for the pea plants to wind up, and meter sticks, or you'll see later the kids were using rulers and putting a couple of rulers together. So some kind of measuring tool. I will tell you that one time, only one of the years that we did this, because we did this every year, we did actually put up a trellis that had meter sticks as side posts and as a center post, because we were trying to see if we could actually make it so that the kids could see how tall the pea plants were by where they were on the grid of the trellis and the meter sticks. So, whatever you think of that makes this even more mathematical, even more scientific to the kids is always worth trying. So students planted the peas and measured their growth and plotted that information on a line graph. Again, you could make many different kinds of graphs with this information, but the one that our lesson called for was a line graph. The first measurement was 2 weeks after planting the peas, and then I believe they measured it almost every week after that. Oh yes, every Monday for 10 weeks. So as Tori told you, what we find, it just doesn't matter the age of the child. They love being outside. They love working in the garden. And I'm going to say almost to a student, I can't even remember a student out in our garden that wasn't enjoying themselves. For some students, it's the first time they've even tasted a pea or planted a seed. And they were fascinated with how tall the pea plants grew. Even sometimes it would stretch over a vacation, and they'd come back after a week of vacation, and their plants were so much taller, and it was just amazing to them. And of course, to us, it's such a valuable experience to turn into math and science learning. They're able to see the changes over time, so it's such a real example to them of why we have data, why we put it on a graph, and what those graphs really mean when you're reading them, because they see so many, we talk about so many different examples of graphs and what data is on the graph, but when you're actually growing a plant and then graphing the height of those plants, it has a whole different meaning to students, and it really makes the learning even deeper.
Thank you, Monica. That's great. And
I just have I'm sorry, just one last thing, because this is one of my real personal points that I feel is really important. You can grow these plants indoors, and we often will grow some plants on the windowsill. But it's really outside. It's the real context for this kind of math or science. And so being outside and having the learning happen in the real context of growing plants is, I think, just the ultimate learning experience.
Okay, and I'm definitely going to ask you a question about that, so hold that. We've got one more teacher to present, and we've got questions flying on the chat board below. So we're definitely coming back to peas. And Tori, we're coming back to counting and seeds too. So hold on for just a moment, and we're going to hear one more teacher, and this is Katie Hussey, who's a teacher from Boston, from the Mather Elementary School in Dorchester, and she's got a great lesson to share with us about area and perimeter. Welcome, Katie.
Excellent. Hi, thank you. And just to start, before we actually did this activity around area and perimeter, I had taken my class out to the garden to practice just measuring. And then when we came back into the classroom, they were writing their own story problems using the language of how much taller, how much longer, how much wider, because that tends to be a really difficult concept for kids. So that was kind of their first experience in the garden. And then as you can see, there's our outdoor classroom. The learning goals for this activity is for kids to be able to apply their understanding of area and perimeter and multiplication and apply that with this problem about how many bulbs of garlic can you plant with the dimensions of the 36 by 72 garden. And then they also had the rules that the garlic bulbs had to be planted 6 inches from the perimeter and 6 inches from each other. And in preparation for that, Sarah was amazing. She and I met for probably 5 minutes beforehand. I told her some of my ideas. She was the one who came up with the garlic and the facts. And she and I discussed, because we, in 3rd grade, we're new to multiplication, so we thought, multiples of 6 would probably be good for where we were, so that's where she came up with the 36 by 72. She came up with the parameters the kids had to work with for, with how far the garlic had to be planted. And then when she came in, really I got to kind of be a co-facilitator with her, and another big focus of this, along with area, perimeter, and multiplication facts, was the Mathematical Practice Standard 1, where kids are persevering through a difficult task and trying to figure it out on their own. So she came in, and when she arrived, I had her rulers out, I had blank paper, I had 1-inch grid paper for kids. And initially, she presented the problem with the 3, rules for the kids, and we just let them go for it. And that's actually a picture of them when we were doing our measuring the first time. So as they were doing it, it was really interesting to watch. At first they just started drawing all these things, thinking about like 36. So let me draw 36 little plants. And then as they were doing it, they thought, well, wait a second, that's too big. And so they were kind of, slowly, at first it started out independent, and then kids kind of got into groups, and that was fine. We said, whatever, talk with a partner, whatever you want, as long as you keep trying it. And so there was some frustration, but in persevering through it, they worked really hard, and eventually they started to think less about drawing these plants and more about how can I use these numbers to really try to help me figure this out. And it did take about 45 minutes, but again, it was really neat to watch the way that they were able to figure this out. And there's some examples of the student work. So you could see initially it's not quite right, but this is as we were finally getting there. So the one on the bottom where it says you could put 55 garlics, he was at least now drawing the rectangle and trying to really space them out, but then realized that wasn't quite right. And then finally, when they went to that half-inch grid paper, they were kind of able to start to figure it out, but it did take time to actually get to that point where they realized, like, all right, so 6s and 36 and 72, and kind of once that light bulb went off and they started sharing with it, then they're able to use that half-inch grid paper and even be able to think, okay, so each one of these squares is now representing 6 inches within my perimeter, which was really helpful for them to see. And then the culminating event was about a week later, we were actually able to go out to the plot that was going to be for garlic and actually take our rulers with us and see if what we had come up with was right. And again, Sarah was awesome, and the kids actually wanted to lay their rulers down, and then we thought about how we could do it more efficiently. And once they had really measured the perimeter of it, then they started drawing in, like just with a stick, tracing in those square units within to see if their area was correct too. And the kids were just, they're really into it. It was a much more creative way than just giving them, you know, more rectangle pictures or more stories that aren't as contextualized as really helping plant in our own garden. And then, like I said, you know, the more you use the garden, which I think this has already been said, really the better they can create that vocabulary, whether it be about the plants in the actual garden, but also that mathematical vocabulary really helps. And just that goal of knowing that they were going to get to go and see that we didn't actually get to plant that day because, you know, circumstances beyond our control, but the kids were really engaged. They were really excited about trying this out and working together and struggling through this math problem with the knowledge that even if this is hard, we'll figure it out, and then we'll get to go outside and actually get in the garden again.
Thank you, Katie. That is great, really inspirational. And we're going to be moving to the questions, but I'm going to go ahead and ask the first question back to you, Katie, about, you mentioned a couple times about kids struggling and their frustration, and I'm wondering if you could just say a few words about kind of the role of that kind of struggling and how kids learn. Like, it sounds a little bit to me like that's a valuable thing for, in your eyes as a teacher, for kids to have to do.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I mean, it's now one of those mathematical practice standards of the Common Core. It's the first one that kids persevere and solve problems. And I think typically for teachers it's hard to watch kids struggle because we're here to help them not struggle and to help them figure it out. But it's so much more empowering when they realize that, okay, the first try didn't work and I tried that and that didn't really make sense. But by conferring with a friend or by trying a different tool, I actually can figure this out, and it's really empowering for them to be able to come to that conclusion.
Yeah, thank you. So maybe we should stick with some other questions for Katie here, and then we'll go back to some seed questions for Tori. There's a question from Alan Delbridge down here about applying these ideas to middle school. And we've got JK and then a third and a fourth grade lesson here. But I'm wondering, Katie, if you or Monica have ideas about extending these lessons for middle school or other things in the garden for middle schoolers.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
So we typed in an additional resource called Math in the Garden. You'll see it in the link to, this is actually a book that I use to do a lot of teacher planning for teacher PD about using math in the garden. And you'll see ideas there for other ones, for other lessons that you could easily extend. Or you could look at the new math standards, for instance, changes over time. That isn't in our elementary standards anymore, but I believe it moved up to middle school. So actually that one lesson that Christine did is probably very appropriate in middle school now.
Great, thank you. And Katie, do you have anything you want to add to that?
I was going to say, honestly, I don't know a whole lot about middle school standards, but I definitely think, even in thinking about just area and perimeter, how you could probably increase the numbers or really apply some of those formulas and things like that, or even cubic volume. You could probably think about the volume of different parts of the garden. It's kind of close I can come up with.
Yeah, thank you. And Alan, I want to say that we are really focused mostly on elementary lessons this fall, and we plan to extend that to more middle school lessons this spring. So we'll be circling back around, and if you come up or hear of ideas or things that you've done in between time, please let us know. Okay, we've got a question here for Tori about what kind of seeds do your students find in your garden, Tori?
Actually, we've had the opportunity to look at seeds in pumpkins. I remember, I think this is when I was teaching kindergarten. So they opened up the pumpkins for us, and we were able to count out all the seeds, which was fun because there's a lot of slimy things in pumpkins. So that was exciting. And then I think the garden coordinator at the time brought in apples as well, so we counted the seeds in apples. That's all I can remember right now, but it was really great to work with the garden coordinator because the person that I was working with really wanted vegetables and fruits that had a lot of seeds for the students to count. So those are the vegetables and fruits I remember.
That sounds great. And I know we've got garden coordinators on the line here and from CitySprouts and I think from other places too. So if you want to take this opportunity just to put a list of some great vegetables for seed counting and seed comparison in that chat box below, I think that would be a great gift. So type away. Another question for you, Tori, is you mentioned science and math, about the garden being a great place to combine science and math for young learners. Can you say another word or so about what that looks like or an example of that?
So for math, obviously we're looking at counting, but also sorting. And another great activity that I've worked with garden coordinators, there's a sheet called Rainbow Colors in the Garden where we're looking at different colors, and that's another way to classify. So that's another way that they're assuming the role of mathematicians. And then as scientists, I really want for students to be able to not just look at pictures of things, but to really be able to get the 3D view of things that we're discussing in the classroom. So for instance, we have to know about the difference between living things and non-living things. So seeing living things 3D, I can put up things on the smartboard on the computer, but having them be able to use all of their senses, and that's another great objective for kindergartners where they have to know about their senses and use all of their senses. And usually tasting is off of the list, but with the great addition of our CitySprouts Garden, they can actually use the sense of taste. So that's just some of the ways that they're able to assume the role of scientists and mathematicians.
Oh, thank you. That's excellent. That's a really great full answer. And also answers another question that was earlier about following up in the classroom. That's really nice. Let's see. We've got a question here from Erin about the P lesson, who asked, was figuring out how to record the data or the different methods of recording the data ever part of the student's lesson? And I think she's saying or asking, were students involved in that decision about how to figure out how to record the data?
Right. So I have to apologize. I don't remember that actual part of the lesson. What I would say as someone who has worked with children around thinking about groups of data and how to graph them and how to organize them is that I would not do that up front. What I would do is have them plant the seeds, record a couple of weeks of growth, and then start talking to them, okay, if we're going to put this on a graph, then, how tall do you think your plant would grow? Because you need to have the graph, one side of the graph, have a high enough data point that, that you can graph the highest plant. So that gets into a discussion of sort of the magnitude of things, and those are really interesting discussions with children because they sometimes don't have a real strong sense of magnitude of numbers and data. And so I would wait till it starts growing a little bit and then start talking about how tall could something grow. And then given what you think is going to be the highest growth within, reason, then that's going to help you decide on the scale. Are you going to have a scale that's by centimeters, by, inches, by 10, is every box or every line going to be 10 centimeters? It really depends on how tall the plants might grow. But I think that discussion about height and data and measurement is best started after they've had a little bit of growth. And so I wouldn't put the graph together right at the beginning, but I don't remember in the investigations lesson if they did have us do that.
Okay, great. And this is really following the P lesson, is really an elaboration or extension of the district, that fourth grade unit, which is now maybe a middle school unit that teachers get. Is that correct?
Well, it was in our math curriculum. We've in Cambridge changed to a different math curriculum, but what I would say is that it's very appropriate for the new science standards. So even if you're not teaching it as a math lesson, you would be doing the exact same sort of lessons, but in your science.
Mm-hmm. So like Tori's example, a real application of math in a science lesson.
Right. If we have a moment, I could give an example of a fifth grade math lesson that actually is part of the current math standards for fifth grade.
That'd be great. We'd love to hear it.
Okay. So again, it was volume is a important critical area in fifth grade still, and it was in years past as well. So with the new Common Core, it remained an important critical area. And the math lessons we had in our former math curriculum for volume, I always was a little uncomfortable with because it didn't, and as I said earlier, something that's really important to me is where does this math apply? Can the kids really understand what the real purpose of this kind of math is? And so in our previous curriculum, we were estimating the volume of the room. And so I would say to teachers, well, when are we ever going to fill the room with anything? I mean, to the top of the ceiling. And the answer is probably never, right? So the real application for volume, and especially things like cubic yards, is things like filling a raised bed with soil, because things like that are sold in cubic yards. But a fifth grader would not have any perception of what a cubic yard is until you broke it down into cubic feet. And then you actually put cubic feet together to make a cubic yard. And so what we did is we went to the U-Haul place and bought cubic foot boxes. And we didn't fill them with soil, but we put them together. And we put a couple together, and we had kids start to think about, well, if this is a cubic foot, what do you think a cubic yard is? How many cubic feet do you think are in a cubic yard? And then we had, and so you need many boxes for this, right? But then we had them start to build an actual cubic yard, and it's much bigger than they think it would be initially. But then you can bring it out into the garden, take the number of boxes, so you have these cubic foot boxes, take them out to the garden and put them on top of a bed that already has soil in it probably, and start to think about, would a cubic yard of soil fill this bed?
That's a really brilliant idea, because often people talk about doing volume when you're building a garden, but then once you fill those beds with soil, oftentimes you say, well, I don't know how to do that lesson anymore because now they're filled with soil. But to use the empty boxes and be able to stack them in the garden is really, that's a really, I think, a really clever idea of being able to extend that lesson beyond the building of the garden. There's a question here from Michelle for you, Monica, about how did you make the cubic yard?
Right. So you have individual cubic boxes, right? Cubic foot boxes. And so you put 3 in a row, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you're going to have 3 in a row, then you're going to have 3 high and 3 deep. I think it comes out to be 27 if I remember correctly. So you have to actually build 3. I wish I had a picture. I'm so sorry. You put 3 1-foot boxes next to each other, and then that makes 1 row. Then you have 3 rows flat on the ground, and then you need to make 3 layers of that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's 9 times 3, 27.
Yeah, very cool.
But that would be a great picture if I had a picture for you. I apologize.
I know. We need the technology to be able to draw these things for everyone to see.
Right.
Maybe next year we'll have it.
Well, I'll tell you, I've done this activity. I've taken those boxes and I've put them around and put it out as a center at parent nights as well, and challenged parents and kids to think about, do you know how big a cubic yard is? And just left the materials and put the question up, and people were building, trying to figure out how many cubic feet are in a cubic yard.
Oh, that's cool. We have a question here, or a comment about symmetry, and I'm wondering, Tori and Katie, if this is part of your JK unit or revisited or cycled back to in 3rd grade, Katie, looking for symmetry, and if you've ever used the garden for that kind of a discovery.
You know, honestly, so far I haven't. That hasn't been one of the standards for our math lessons, but I can see that also probably crossing over into an art lesson, possibly, where the students would be able to try to find different ways to match things up. I do remember in the 1st grade curriculum, I believe, that we did have a lot of symmetry lessons where we did use it. So that's my take on it.
Yeah, Katie, do you? This is a real question. I don't know if it's anything that you deal with in 3rd grade. So, is it?
When I taught 2nd grade, we used to teach symmetry, and at that point, this was years ago, we didn't have a garden. But I can imagine that. I mean, just looking at flowers and leaves and all kinds of things, symmetry is kind of a natural, easy way to observe in nature. But no, it's nothing I've had to use in 3rd grade.
Right. Okay, so I've got one more question here, and maybe we could go through starting with Katie, Tori, and then Monica, just asking you about making edible connections to the garden in lessons that you've done or thought about or plan to do. Are there ways that you are able to bring in the edible part, that particular sensory experience for kids in a core academic lesson?
Yes, I have a great example. I was given a great opportunity to be on the Arthur show, and for this particular show, we were talking about solar cooking in my classroom, and I was teaching 1st grade, and we were able to make pizzas. And so we used the herbs in the garden and the tomatoes, and then we actually solar cooked the pizzas by using the garden area where we left out the pizza boxes, and we allowed the sun to do its cooking job, and we ate the pizza in the classroom. And then we also used herbs in the garden for our salad as well. So the students were really excited about that. I actually remember it because it actually was a very tasty, menu that we had from the garden. So that was exciting, and that was one of my favorite opportunities where I was able to use the garden for an edible reason.
Cool. How about Katie? Or Monica?
Sure. So one of the things that the kids actually in the 4th grade lesson do is they do eat the peas that they grow eventually. And we've had, I actually have a different example in part because I train teachers how to do lessons when I did a teacher training, we actually picked some of the herbs and things to add to a butter and to some snacks we put out at training. So if you want to encourage the teachers or the adults to get the kids tasting things, put some out on a plate for them when you're training them or giving them ideas, because there's nothing like, as Tori said, the memory for yourself as an adult of how tasty that is to remind you to do those things when you're out there with the kids.
That sounds good. Great. Thank you. And I'm not sure, Katie. Katie, are you still on the line, or we may have lost you? Okay. Well,
sorry. I had actually put it in the chat box too. I haven't used it for edible foods yet. Our garden really got going last year, so you know, by the time everything was blooming, it just life got away from me.
Yeah. Well, there are lots more chances for that, and I'm just thinking about garlic as having a lot of potential. So that might be something that that comes up. We'd love to hear those ideas. I'm also in collecting ideas for the spring, thinking that technology is something that sounds like we could, between solar ovens and other ways that you guys have touched on things that could really be a great forum session on using the garden for technology. So great. I think we've got a good long list of questions here, and I hope that these have really sparked some thinking for you all on the line. And I hope the conversations continue. If you've got more questions, send them to us. We can pass them along to the teachers. Teachers, if you think of more resources that would be helpful for your community of garden-based teachers here in this forum, let us know, and we would be happy to pass those along too. I want to remind you all that you get professional development credit for this course. Everyone who's on this call will receive a certificate of participation that you can use toward professional development credit. Boston Public School teachers and Cambridge Public School teachers additionally can register through their districts, and we can help you with that. Those links are on our CitySprouts website. Mark your calendars for the next session, October 2nd, in 2 weeks, where we'll be talking about science again, looking at wonderful worms and simple machines in the garden, a 5th grade unit. And remember that November 13th, we'll be able to meet each other live. So please plan to come. Jen Zyme is celebrating our CitySprouts Forum with us with a catered reception, and we hope that you all can be there. Well, thank you all very much for joining us. Thank you so much to our teachers, Katie, Tori, Monica, and we're going to thank Christine too. You're incredibly busy, and for you to take time out of your schedules to share these lessons, we are hugely appreciative. Thank you so much for joining us, everybody, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks.